What's the inspiration behind that?
When I saw it in the field, it was like, I've got to do something with that, and I wanted to do a military tribute. And when you look at it, I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at the tailgate on it.
For an entire generation of gearheads, Stacy David was not just another face on cable television. He was proof that you didn't need a fancy shop or a trust fund to build something incredible. With his wind-blown hair, unhurried drawl, and a genuine respect for anyone willing to pick up a wrench, he turned Saturday afternoons into a kind of national shop class. Then, seemingly overnight, he was gone from the show that made him famous. No farewell tour, no tabloid meltdown, no tearful finale, just silence, followed by years of fans asking the same question in forum threads and comment sections. What actually happened to Stacy David? The answer, once you dig into it, isn't a scandal at all. It's something rarer in the entertainment world. A person who valued the work more than the spotlight, and who was willing to prove it. Long before cameras ever found him, Stacy David was a restless kid in Boise, Idaho. Born in January of 1963, with a habit of taking things apart just to understand how they worked. He enrolled at Boise State University, but never finished a degree there, in part because his curiosity kept pulling him toward engines, welders, and half-built projects instead of lecture halls. That hands-on instinct became the foundation of everything he'd later be known for. He wasn't chasing a media career. He was chasing an answer to a much simpler question. What happens if I fix this myself? What a lot of fans don't realize is that David's path to automotive television ran straight through the music industry. He relocated to Nashville and spent years working as a professional guitarist, playing behind touring acts and studio sessions. It sounds like an unrelated detour, but it wasn't. Musicians learn to think in structure, build, tension, release, resolution. And that same instinct shows up in the way David approached a vehicle build. He didn't treat a truck as a checklist of parts to bolt on. He treated it as something with a shape and a story, the way a song has movements. That sensibility is part of what separated him from hosts who were essentially reading a script in a garage. David had actually lived the tinkering life long before a producer ever handed him a microphone. By the time the late 1990s rolled around, automotive cable television needed a jolt. Viewers were tired of glossy commercials disguised as programming and wanted to see real fabrication, real mistakes, and real solutions. In 1999, Trucks premiered on TNN, later folding into the Spike TV lineup. And it found an audience almost immediately by giving people exactly that. According to those who covered the show at the time, Trucks became one of the network's highest-rated programs. And it did that without gimmicks, just David building, welding, and explaining his way through project after project. The truck that made him a household name in gearhead circles was Copperhead, a 1967 Chevrolet C10 that started as little more than a frame and a cab and ended up as one of the most influential custom trucks of its era. Fans still talk about how that build reshaped the custom truck scene that followed it. Alongside Copperhead came Crazy Horse, a customized Ford Bronco that carried its own devoted following, especially among viewers who loved classic off-road machines long before the modern Bronco revival brought them back into fashion. These weren't disposable props for a 30-minute episode. They were long-running characters that viewers checked in on the way you check in on a friend's project in the driveway next door. What made David different from a lot of his contemporaries wasn't just the quality of the builds. It was his attitude toward the audience. He never spoke like someone protecting trade secrets. He slowed down. He explained his reasoning. He treated the person watching at home as a future builder rather than a passive spectator killing time before the next commercial break. That's a small thing that adds up to something enormous over years of episodes. Trust. Viewers didn't just enjoy watching Stacy David work. They believed him. Here's where the story takes the turn that still generates debate among longtime fans. David hosted and produced Trucks through the end of its 2005 season, and then he stepped away. There was no dramatic on-air goodbye. According to his own public comments at the time, he described his departure simply as pursuing other opportunities, a phrase vague enough to fuel years of speculation, but honest enough to reveal that this wasn't a firing or a blow-up. It was a choice. It's worth being clear about something here. David has never gone on record with a detailed blow-by-blow account of internal network politics, sponsor pressure, or creative disputes behind his exit from trucks. What we do know from the public record is the timeline itself. He finished out the season. The show continued in a different direction without him. And within roughly a year and a half, he resurfaced with an entirely new project built on his own terms. Anyone claiming to know the exact private conversations that led to that decision is speculating. And it's fair to say plenty of longtime fans have filled in that gap with their own theories over the years. But the pattern of what he did next tells you plenty about what he was looking for. Instead of shopping himself around to the highest bidder or angling for a bigger network slot, David spent the gap between shows building the framework for something he could actually control. That in itself says something. Plenty of television personalities, once they've built an audience, spend their leverage chasing a bigger platform. David appears to have spent his leverage chasing ownership. On March 31st, 2007, Stacey David's Gears premiered on ESPN2, and longtime viewers immediately recognized the DNA of trucks in it, but with a crucial difference. This time, David wasn't just the on-camera talent. He was building the show through his own production company, Rattletrap, which meant the pacing, the tone, the choice of projects, and the depth of explanation in every episode reflected his judgment rather than a network's programming calendar. Gears didn't stay in one place for long, and that's part of what makes its survival story interesting. After its ESPN2 debut, the show moved to Speed Channel for its second season in 2008 and stayed there for 6 seasons. When Speed was rebranded, Gears picked up and moved again, landing on MAV TV starting in 2014, with syndication also reaching velocity. Most shows don't survive that many network shuffles. Audiences build loyalty to a channel as much as a host, and losing that channel affiliation usually means losing the show. Gears kept going anyway, which suggests the loyalty was built around David himself, rather than whatever network happened to be carrying him at the time. Over its run, Gears tackled an enormous range of projects: vintage muscle cars, off-road rigs, kit cars, a Miata-based custom called Banshee, a McLaren M6 GT replica, restorations of trucks like Heavy Metal, and even segments diving into automotive history like the story of the old Lions drag strip in Southern California. The show wasn't locked into one genre of vehicle the way some competitors were. It followed David's curiosity, which is exactly the point. On trucks, he was the face of somebody else's format. On Gears, the format existed because of him. By any measure, Gears has had a longer run than trucks ever did. It's still producing new episodes today, nearly 2 decades after its debut, moving through season after season on channels like MAV TV and Velocity, still built around David's original pitch of encouraging ordinary people to get out there and build something. That kind of longevity rarely happens by accident, and it definitely doesn't happen to shows that are secretly struggling behind the scenes. What's notable is that David never used Gears' staying power as a launching pad to chase a bigger, flashier deal. He didn't pivot into reality TV drama formats the way a lot of garage and restoration shows eventually did, with manufactured conflict between shop employees or artificial deadlines designed to create tension. Automotive television as a genre absolutely went in that direction over the 2010s. Louder editing, shouting matches, race-against-the-clock gimmicks. David's shows largely didn't follow that trend, which likely cost him some of the viral, clip-based attention that other personalities picked up. But it also meant the audience that stuck around for the actual content, the fabrication, the troubleshooting, the honest explanation of why a part failed and how to fix it properly next time. It's fair to view that as a deliberate trade-off rather than a retreat. A wider audience built on shock value and manufactured drama is, by definition, less loyal. People tune in for the spectacle, not the substance, and they move on the moment a louder show comes along. David's audience, by contrast, has followed him across 5 different networks over roughly 25 years. That's not the trajectory of someone who vanished. That's the trajectory of someone who prioritized a particular kind of relationship with his audience over the size of the spotlight. If you rewatch old episodes of either show, one thing stands out immediately. David almost never treats the garage like a performance space. He treats it like a classroom. Suspension geometry gets explained, not glossed over. Welding technique gets shown step by step, not sped up into a highlight reel. Budget decisions get discussed openly instead of hidden behind a "we made it work" cutaway. That approach requires patience, both from the host and from the audience. And it's part of why his content has aged unusually well compared to shows built around shock value that now feel dated the moment, the trend they were chasing past. This teaching instinct also explains why David's builds tend to carry names and personalities rather than just spec sheets. Copperhead, Crazy Horse, Banshee, Heavy Metal. Giving a project a name turns it into a character viewers can follow across months of episodes, which makes the lessons embedded in each build easier to remember. You don't just learn how a C10 gets a chassis swap. You remember it because you were following Copperhead's story. That's the same instinct a musician brings to a set list, sequencing information so it lands, rather than dumping it all at once. So what's the honest answer to why Stacy David seemed to vanish from the mainstream spotlight? The most accurate version of the story isn't that his career collapsed or that a scandal pushed him out. There's no public record of either. It's that he made a series of choices that consistently favored creative control and long-term trust over maximum visibility. He left a hit show at the end of a season rather than let it evolve into something he had no say in. He rebuilt his career through his own production company instead of chasing a bigger network deal. He kept his shows anchored in genuine instruction, even as the broader genre drifted toward manufactured drama. And he's kept doing all of that quietly and consistently for the better part of 3 decades. None of that is a disappearance. It's closer to the opposite, a very long, very deliberate presence, just one that never depended on being the loudest thing on the channel. The mainstream spotlight that shined on trucks in the early 2000s did move on to other shows and other hosts, the way spotlights always do. But David didn't need to chase it because he'd already built something that didn't depend on it. An audience that came back season after season, network after network, because they trusted the guy behind the wrench. Stacy David's real legacy probably isn't measured in ratings at all. It's measured in how many people picked up a welder for the first time because Copperhead made an old, forgotten C10 look like art, or how many kids stood next to a parent in the driveway learning what a torque wrench actually does. That's a slower, less flashy kind of impact than a viral clip, but it's also the kind that lasts. Television built around noise fades as soon as a louder show comes along. Television built around teaching sticks with people for the rest of their lives. That's the real reason the "whatever happened to Stacy David" question keeps circulating, even though the honest answer is far less dramatic than the headlines suggest. He never actually left. He just refused to let the loudest, most commercialized version of automotive television define his career, and he built a smaller, more durable one instead, on his own terms, in his own garage, teaching the same lesson he always taught. You don't need to be famous to build something real. You just need to start.